like, what could the situation be that's the solution? Flush the panties down the toilet.
Yeah.
Welcome to Backtracking, the show where two old friends take a second listen to influential bands' catalogs, track by track. I am J. William Hall.
And I'm Dan Fiden. We'll be taking this journey together, providing context, both historical and personal, on some legendary bands. For our second season, we've picked none other than pioneering indie rockers, American Music Club.
Today on Backtracking, if you have to ask, then you'll never know that we're celebrating our 20th episode of Season 2 by tackling Mark Eitzel's much-discussed collaboration with R.E.M's Peter Buck. It's 1997's West. So tell me, Dan, is your voice gonna sneak like smoke through a crack in their window pane?
It sure is, JW, and rest assured, it's going to curl up on their stairs and light a fire in their brains. But first, let's rejoin the story of Captain Eitzel as he navigated the stormy seas of solo artistry. As you'll recall, Eitzel had fired management around the time AMC called it quits, and so he navigated the many legal and logistical details around the start of his solo journey solo. But eventually, he decided to hire a new manager, rock biz veteran Janet Billig. Upon the completion of 60 Watt Silver Lining, Billig helped book a tour for Eitzel to promote the release. He assembled a band for the road, but for financial reasons, he chose not to work with longtime collaborators like Danny Pearson. Instead, he went with younger players with less experience on the road and less experience with him. And with the exception of multi-instrumentalist Mark Capel, it was a decision that made the 60 Watt tour difficult. And on top of it all, the album didn't perform well commercially. Eitzel was not pleased.
And neither was Virgin. Eitzel's UK label dropped him for the second time, leaving Eitzel to regroup. Nonetheless, he was writing a remarkable amount of music and still felt energized by the freedom of life as a solo artist. While out on the road playing solo sets, Eitzel found himself at Seattle's Crocodile Cafe, which was owned by Stephanie Dorgan and R.E.M. guitarist Peter Buck. Buck was an AMC fan, and he'd crossed paths with Eitzel and the band over the years. So it was natural for him and Eitzel to hang out together after the show. They had a great time, and Eitzel extended an invite to Buck to get together when Buck was next in San Francisco. A few months later, the rock star took him up on the invite. Over dinner, the pair decided to try collaborating on something. They got together at Eitzel's house and over the course of 3 relaxed days, recorded demos of the songs that would eventually appear on West. While originally intended as a few lo-fi contributions to Eitzel's next album, the duo were so enthused with the results they decided to book a proper studio and record an album. Buck recruited members of another of his side projects, Tuatara, to fill out the band. So Eitzel and Buck were joined by Screaming Trees and Mad Season drummer Barrett Martin, Young Fresh Fellows guitarist Scott McCahey, Pearl Jam guitarist Mike McCready, bassist Steve Berlin, and saxophonist Skerrick. The sessions were drama-free thanks to Peter Buck's good vibes and low-pressure working style, and Warner Brothers released the much-hyped album in early May of 1997.
So what else was much hyped in early 1997? Madeleine Albright becomes the first female U.S. Secretary of State, and Deep Blue defeats Garry Kasparov in chess. Biggie Smalls is gunned down in L.A., and Gianni Versace is killed in Miami. OK Computer is released, and I graduate from college. J. William Hall. That's right, 1997, the year of my college graduation.
Yes.
You, of course, at this point had been out in the world.
That's right.
Making
the real world, man.
Making a name for yourself. But 1997 was, of course, the year that I graduated.
Yeah, 1 minute you're BMOC, big man on campus. And the next
that's
minute,
right, yes.
You're fetching coffees for the boss. Lowest rung on
true.
the ladder.
That is true. Now, I don't know that I would ever define myself as BMOC.
No, you didn't feel
No,
BMOC?
I would say that like a John Beam was more of the BMOC. And I was like the BDOC, big dork on campus, you know? But John, do you remember John Beam?
When you say the name, I picture a tall person. Am I correct?
I think he was reasonably tall. He was very nice. He was one of the two people that used to do the play-by-play like radio show of the football games.
Okay.
There were two guys that did. I don't remember who the other one was, but I used to frequently have to go and kind of like engineer that from the radio station and throw it back and forth. And I would, yeah.
Well, okay. So here's a very specific memory. I recall one day the football team is playing their game down at Deeds Field. And we're up in the radio station, you know, and just every hour we got to play station ID. When there's a break in the action, we got to play some carts or whatever.
Yeah.
And whenever we were cutting back to them, we'd be like, let's go back to John Beam down at Deeds Field. You know, we would like hype it up big. And then, speaking of, I guess it's not Mad Seas. It was Alice in Chains was out at that time, and we would harmonize. We would go, "Know me broken," and then I'd go, "Hey, my master." And we would just go just fade it in ghostly underneath those guys, and they could hear it, and they would be kind of like, "What?" Like they thought that something was, Anyway, we had a good time. Good times.
Well, so John Beam, So John Beam was one of those guys, one of those two guys. He was like a beta. He was like a total frat guy.
Yeah.
But totally nice enough, right? But he was the grandson of Jim Beam, or the great grandson of Jim Beam. Yeah, his parents owned Jim Beam, God. Whiskey. Yeah. And so I always remembered. For whatever reason, I always remembered John Beam, and then thinking like, oh yeah, Jim Beam. Yeah, well, there it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, so J. William Hall. Today we are going to tackle Eitzel's second studio solo album, a very interesting album done in concert, in collaboration with Peter Buck of R.E.M.
Yes.
Now tell me, can you describe your relationship with R.E.M. over the years?
Oh, R.E.M. is, if I had to pick three bands that were like the biggest bands in, my head during my adolescence and early adulthood, R.E.M.'s one of them.
Really? So you were a huge fan of R.E.M.
I'm a huge fan of early R.E.M. of the IRS era R.E.M. Like that was what I was, when I first started to get into music, like that was one of the key bands for me. And admittedly, I kind of, slid away from them a bit in the 90s, as the albums went on. And by the time we get to 1997, I think that R.E.M. had just released New Adventures in Hi-Fi, and that is the first R.E.M. album that I never listened to.
You never even listened to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So for you as a fan of R.E.M., what would you say was kind of the break point? I just want to, preface this by saying I have never really been a fan of R.E.M. It isn't as though that it isn't as though I dislike them, but I just never I don't know. They just were never really my thing. And so I know some of the songs, and I'm vaguely aware of that there are interesting transitional eras for that band, which I do appreciate, in any band. But I'd like to, from you, someone who is self-identified as both an R.E.M. fan and an early era R.E.M. fan, what is the break point? What was the moment when you say, okay, this is the end of era 1 R.E.M.?
That one's pretty easy because I think most R.E.M. fans would consider Document was their final album that they did for IRS Records. So that was like their indie period. So they did 5, I believe, full-length albums for IRS and a couple of odds and sods kind of things. And then they made the jump to a major label, Warner Brothers, for the album Green. And that came out, I believe, in 89 because it opened with Pop Song 89. And that was the first album that I was like, I don't like every song on this album, but I stuck with them. And then next album was...
But I just want to interrupt you a little bit. So Document, the big song, was The One I Love?
Yeah. It's The End of the World as We Know It, One I Love.
Okay. And then Green would have been Stand?
Yes. Stand.
Okay.
Pop Song 89, Orange Crush.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. As someone who is not really immersed in the R.E.M. kind of fandom.
I say
I don't different.
I say all of this with the caveat of like I was a teenager and back then it was kind of like, oh, you move up the big label, there's sellouts, and there was a little bit of that attitude. I'm sure if I were to go back and backtrack R.E.M.'s albums, I would probably appreciate those initial big label albums like much more. But, the budget went up, their sound got more kind of commercial mainstream, but the songs are still very strange songs, to be on top 40 radio. I think the only reason we think of like a song like Losing My Religion, it's a standard now. But back then that was a pretty weird song to have on top 40 radio, so it's like they maintained their artistic integrity and all of that. But I think just like, maybe it's like when you get to be 7, 8, 9, 10 albums in, not that you run out of ideas, but you start to kind of retread old ground sonically, lyrically, whatever. And I'll also say that, for me, like I found like Michael Stipe's singing voice, I was more into it when it was more mumbly and mysterious. And then as it got clearer and clearer and clearer, and I think like his voice kind of, I don't know, like I didn't like it as much in the 90s. And so that was kind of a big reason I started to get away from them.
Yeah, see, as someone who didn't really follow R.E.M. closely, I remember when Shiny Happy People became a hit.
Yeah.
As someone who is not into the band, I was like, oh, something happened here. Like they've taken a turn in a direction that, I didn't love them before, but this seems very strange. And then they got into like, they kind of embraced not too long after that, maybe Automatic for the People. They kind of seemed to embrace the rock stardom thing. And there was a lot of like, Michael Stipe was like involved with every rock star that was around.
Yeah, that was Monster, which came after Automatic. That was when that's the quote unquote R.E.M. grunge album, because like that seemed to be when, and it did at the time, from my perspective, it felt like they were chasing a trend instead of like setting a trend.
Interesting. Okay.
And and that's, I'm sure that's completely unfair, but that was just like my perception as a fan or whatever at the time.
Yeah.
And, Automatic for the People was sort of the last one where I bought that album. I listened to it pretty thoroughly. Like I didn't like everything on it, but some of it I liked a lot. So, that, but then it was kind of a sharp drop off there, and I didn't buy Monster. I didn't really follow them. Then Bill Berry left the band, a couple years later. So the timing is interesting though, because so the first era, IRS, second era is probably like their early Warner Brothers albums up until Bill Berry leaves, which I think is after the album immediately preceding this Mark Eitzel collaboration.
Okay. So this is really, you would consider this album, West, sitting towards the end of R.E.M's career.
No, toward the end of their Imperial period, I would say. Like the 90s was kind of when R.E.M. I think of as R.E.M's Imperial period, where they were arguably the most popular band in the world. Like they had gotten to the major label, they'd had numerous hit songs, and they were touring stadiums worldwide.
Yeah.
So that the album that they recorded that came out just prior, oh Jesus. Sorry. The album that came out just prior to this one was one that they recorded, or they sort of like developed it while they were sound checking stadium gigs.
Okay.
And Bill Berry played on that. And that was considered like kind of a more rockin' album. But then Bill Berry had a brain aneurysm on that tour, and that, may or may not have caused him to, think like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And so then he kind of retired. And then they were, R.E.M. was a trio, and then they did a bunch of more albums as a trio.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea. Okay.
4 or 5 other albums, but I have never listened to them. And,
okay.
And that was when like the critics kind of turned on them as well. My cats are like destroying my space here.
It's all right. That's all right. Don't let the cats win. You give them an inch, they're going to take a mile.
Well,
so
they've already
that's
taken
interesting. So two things that I would say about this is, number one, it sounds like someone should be backtracking R.E.M.
Oh, I
that
could
would be an
backtrack R.E.M. In my sleep, but that is well trod ground because there.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's dozens probably of R.E.M. specific podcasts out there.
Really? Well, listen, I think the fans out there should write in and tell us whether they're interested in R.E.M. in a future season. Probably I am not the right person to go on that journey with J. William Hall, but I'm certain there are people who could go on that journey very capably.
I don't sleep around on my podcast
well,
partner.
Listen, this is a it's like I think of this podcast as the beginning of a collective, right? A loose collective of people making podcasts that no one listens to.
Right. I'm just gonna let you know, if we sign up one more person to be part of the collective, I'm gonna start a union drive.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I think we need to unionize the backtracking.
Well,
podcast.
This is interesting. All right. Well, fair enough. So here we are. The album was released. Oh, so one housekeeping note, very, very minor. I was hit last week by Spotify with a copyright infringement notice.
What? Oh, come on.
It seems as though they have an automated system that goes through and processes all the podcasts and tries to find, the same way that YouTube does this. They try and find copywritten music and or copyrighted music and call you out on it. So they did. I got hit with copyright violation notices for maybe 5 of the episodes in season 1, 5 of the Rush episodes, and 1 of the season 2 episodes. I responded to Spotify. There is a rule that I guess they have that's like, if this is a criticism podcast, you're allowed to use more of the music than if you're just using it as, your theme song or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I kind of appealed it based on that. But what I am doing now moving forward is I'm the clips of the songs that you're going to hear in the podcast, really beginning with 60 Watt Silver Lining, all the way through, the end, they're going to be much shorter. And I'm doing that just so that I don't run afoul of this. So you're going to be getting 15 15-ish second clips of the songs. I don't like that because I like to kind of find what I think is kind of the most notable part of the song, the most memorable part of the song. Frequently that'll be 30 seconds of the song. But I understand that this is an important element of how the musicians protect the financial value of their creative output, and I certainly don't want to do anything that would run afoul of that. So I apologize for shorter clips, but such is life.
Hopefully it'll still be enough to wet your whistle.
It will be. But as always, I encourage you to listen to the podcast and have another window open on your computer or however you do this with the actual album and listen to the full version of the song. And then go back to the podcast. Then, full version of the next song. That's really what the connoisseur of backtracking would do.
That is an ideal scenario, and it also gives you an opportunity to get angry with our ridiculous misinterpretations of the lyrics and intent and dumb opinions about minutia that shouldn't matter.
Yeah. And speaking of getting angry, I did notice that some listener out there gave us a 3-star rating.
Whoa.
That is... There no review. They didn't say anything about why they think it's 3 stars.
Coward.
They didn't say whether it was season 1 or season 2 that they're rating. So
Probably
I'll never
one.
know unless these people decide to kind of come out of hiding and stop being passive aggressive with the 3-star rating and no comments. Why don't you just fucking, be a man? Tell us what's wrong with it. Make your case. Instead of throwing fucking eggs from behind a tree and letting your friends run up and throw the bag of shit on the door and take all the risks. You know what I'm talking about. Jay William, you know exactly what I'm referring to right there, don't you?
You know what we did in my hometown in lieu of flaming bags of dog poop or whatever? We did something called corning.
Corning? Really?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
And as far as we can tell, people from my town of my generation who have gone out into the world and lived in other places and have told people about this ritual that took place in the fall, we would sneak into local cornfields that were still standing where the corn was all like dried out. And we would get as much of it as we could possibly get. We would take buckets and then we would shuck all that corn by hand, and you had all these hard kernels. Then you would run around the neighborhood in the night and you would throw handfuls of the kernels at people's like front window, and it would make a, rattle racket. And then you would run away and they would come out and turn on the light and look out the door and try to see who it was. And you'd all laugh. That was called corning. And that was, kind of a mild prank. That was what everybody did where I grew up. But apparently nobody else did this anywhere.
Well, I can tell why nobody else did it anywhere. It sounds like it takes way too much work, way too much work on the part of the prankster. Mm-hmm. And the impact is like, there's some, I threw some corn kernels at somebody's window. Like, that's not, there's no cleanup required for that if you're the victim of it. Whereas like you TP somebody's house, that's a big mess. It's a pain in the ass to get the toilet paper out of the trees and all that stuff, right?
I think older people were annoyed because they had to sweep up all the corn kernels or whatever, that were like all over there. Like I'm picturing so many of the porches, or patios where I grew up, where they'd have that fake green, like AstroTurf kind of carpet, thin, kind of outdoory, and their corn, you'd have all these corn kernels in there, and it'd be difficult to like get it all swept up. So I think like people found it mildly annoying. And then you always had the teenage boys who were pushing the limits, who would like chuck like a whole cob, and
sure. Now you're talking.
Break a window, crack a window.
Yeah.
So it could get, slightly more than just mischievous.
Yeah. Yeah. But not, it was not, it didn't rise to the level of egging or TPing, I would say. Or certainly the flaming shit bomb that was nowhere close to that.
Well, I actually got arrested for egging a house.
Did you really?
Yeah. Rights read to me, the whole
really
yard. Oh yeah.
How old were you?
No, this is like a whole episode unto itself. I was 13.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, listen.
Yeah.
When you're egging, yeah, I can understand. If you're arrested at 14 for egging, I can understand de-escalating down to corning,
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it had gone the other way. You start corning young, and then maybe you graduate to egging, and my
and then what's next?
My brush with egging did not end well.
Yeah. Well, listen. All right, so we've got to get moving into this. So we've
holy
discussed
crap, what's going on?
We've discussed a little bit of R.E.M's career. We've situated this album within that career.
Yeah.
But I think what's important to understand at this point is Peter Buck is one of the biggest rock stars in the world at this point.
Totally.
Right? He is undeniably, and he's a rock star with some amount of indie credibility.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Even while R.E.M's star was ascending, Peter Buck continued to guest on people's records. He continued to kind of low-key produce different bands that were definitely indie college rock kind of level bands. He I knew him to be a guest guitarist for. He played on a Replacements album early on. Then he played with Robin Hitchcock on numerous albums. And he produced Uncle Tupelo, their third album.
I actually didn't know that. He produced Uncle Tupelo's third album.
Yeah, the March 14th to 20th.
Yeah, wow.
They recorded that in Athens, I think, and Peter Buck was the producer. So he was still kind of, he had side projects and dabbling and, he kept busy. So I do think it's interesting in the context of R.E.M's career, because I don't know exactly when Bill Berry quit the band, but I think that this collaboration with Eitzel would have been in that general time frame. So the dynamics were shifting underneath R.E.M, and maybe Peter Buck had this other side project, Tuatara, and that was kind of like an indie supergroup of sorts, and so I think he definitely had he put lines out in the water and was looking for things, to do and to, outside of R.E.M. I think that was the state of R.E.M. at that point,
And I think it's important. It'll come up a couple of times as we're talking about this. It's also important to remember that 1997, Seattle is still considered an important city in rock music. Sub
Pop is still getting bigger, and it's mutating at that point.
We're definitely, it isn't the beginning of grunge. This is not an era where it's all just happening. That's kind of early 90s, 1993, 1994. That's when all that's kind of really happening. But it's still, I think Pearl Jam is a very big band. Soundgarden is a very big band. I don't remember when Kurt Cobain died, but I think probably he's still alive at this point.
He might not be. I think Nirvana might be done, because I think Foo Fighters' first album came out maybe 96. So
okay, that's
so.
But
I see grunge as having passed sort of at this point as a big thing, But the sound
it's definitely
has
passing.
Now you've got all these pop punk and that kind of stuff was, I think, getting big around this time.
Yeah, and of course, new metal, Limp Bizkit. That's all starting to happen. But I brought up Seattle here because it's important the setting we talked about. The setting here. They really first connected and hung out, Eitzel and Buck. I mean, they kind of knew. There's some in the sources that I've kind of looked at in preparation for this. It's clear that Eitzel and the American Music Club folks and R.E.M. had crossed paths many times over the years, right? They were certainly running in broadly the same circles while they were both kind of coming up. There is an anecdote that Voodie did not like Peter Buck. They did not get along. Yeah. But Eitzel seemed to have a fine relationship with them. And when he was playing at the Crocodile Cafe in Seattle, it's important to remember that the Crocodile Cafe was really the music venue, or one of a couple of music venues in Seattle that became kind of the quote unquote kind of birthplace of grunge. All of the early grunge act played at the Crocodile Cafe in Seattle in the early 90s. It was founded by this, one of the founders. There are three owners from what I remember, but one of the owners was this woman who Peter Buck married, right? And then he became an investor in the Crocodile. And so the setting for what's happening here is, in a way, you could almost think about it as this is maybe I'm not from Seattle. I wasn't in Seattle at that point. I don't know Seattle that well, but it was definitely a place where semi-famous people, scenesters would interact at this time. And so Eitzel is booked to play a show there, realizes Buck might be there. Turns out he is. They hang out after the show with Greg Tooley. Is it Tooley from the Afghan? I want to say from the Afghan Wigs.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Is
and
it
Michael
Tooley
Stipe.
Tully or Tully?
Could be something else. Could be Tully. I don't know. I don't know anything about. But apparently there was a very fun evening.
It's Dully or it's
Dooley.
D.
Yeah. Or
yeah. Whatever.
Yeah. So
sorry, Greg.
We'll get that right when we do the Afghan Wigs backtracking. But
yes,
Michael Stipe is there. Peter Buck is there. Eitzel's there, and they apparently have a great night hanging out. That concludes with Eitzel kind of saying, "Hey, next time you're in San Francisco, give me a call and we'll go out to dinner or something." So that sets up a few months later. Peter Buck actually coming to San Francisco. They have the dinner where they discuss collaborating, which then turns into basically a 1-week jam session at Eitzel's house where all of these songs are written very quickly without a lot of brouhaha. But it is Peter Buck playing guitar while Eitzel is singing. So these songs are substantially co-written. And I do think as we get into the kind of production and arrangement discussion, I'd be very interested in hearing from you, Jay William, how much R.E.M. you kind of hear in these compositions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, you'll hear from me.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll tackle that. So let's go over the basics first. The basics. Release date. It was either May 5th or May 6th, 1997 on Warner Brothers. Unclear. Different sources have different release dates here. But it was early May, without a doubt. And the album is 53 minutes and 33 seconds. The cover art. We always talk about the cover art.
Yeah.
I could not find, I don't know if perhaps you were able to find it, I could not find any information on who shot the cover photo. Bobby Neal Adams, who has been taking photos for the band, or photos that the band has used as covers, or AMC has used as covers, from the going all the way back to The Restless Stranger. He is credited with back cover photos, and there are definitely some photos that look as though in the infold and on the back cover that look as though they could be Bobby Neal Adams photos. Eitzel himself is also credited with some of the photography, but the cover photo specifically, I was not able to find a credit for. But it is a photo of Mark Eitzel.
Yes, this, I don't know who took the photo either, but this is definitely the most kind of like conventional kind of album cover. It's just the classic, here's the guy singing,
Yeah.
nice
Yeah.
photo and, simple text. And the thing that I wonder about is why was this not credited as like Mark Eitzel and Peter Buck?
Yeah. So that is addressed specifically in the book, the Sean Body book.
Okay.
And apparently that's what Eitzel wanted. He wanted it to be, because it was such a collaboration.
Yeah.
He said, well, we should just say it's Mark Eitzel and Peter Buck. Peter Buck objected to that. His explanation to Eitzel was, you're just starting out with your solo career. You have one solo album out. If you all of a sudden do an album with me, it's just going to be confusing to people. Just make it a Mark Eitzel album, get people used to you being a solo artist. And that was basically the argument he did. Now, I don't know whether there's more to that story, whether there were, some other issues that he was concerned about, but apparently it was Peter Buck's decision not to be credited on the cover of this album.
Oh, well, that's too bad, because and this, Monday morning quarterbacking, but like, I feel like it would have probably sold more, just because you would have had an army of R.E.M. fans who were kind of like, oh, Peter Buck, like, let me check this out, like, who had never heard or didn't know that Mark Eitzel had been in American Music Club, like,
yeah,
it seems like that would have been just like an easy way to promote the album, and to me, because Peter Buck is the guy writing the music for the most part on this album, like, yeah, they should have co-credited it,
Yeah, one of the things that kept on kind of going through my mind, and I have no evidence that this is true at all, like zero evidence, but I kept on kind of thinking, gosh, in some ways, I have this theory that Peter Buck had always been a fan of Eitzel, had always been a fan of AMC, that's clear. That's addressed specifically in the book. Peter Buck is a big fan of Mark Eitzel at this point, right? And AMC. And has certainly followed their trajectory over the years, right? And probably, understands, especially compared to his trajectory, that it's been a struggle, probably financially and in all kinds of other ways. But I ask myself, is this album kind of Peter Buck throwing Eitzel a bone? Like, after the band breaks up, he's kind of like, gosh, he could really use a win, a commercial win. Maybe me just kind of putting my name behind this and helping out on this album is going to help generate sales for him. And yeah, I really think that he's a great songwriter and he deserves the attention. I kind of had that question in the back of my mind. That isn't something that's ever really addressed any place that I've seen. And it's also kind of probably a weird thing to ask somebody like Peter Buck. But I wonder if maybe that was part of the calculus behind his eagerness and willingness to do this, to do a whole album with Eitzel.
Well, my impression is that Peter Buck is generous with his time.
Yeah.
He likes to help like up and coming artists, and so this would slot neatly with that kind of mindset. But I'm sure it's a fine line between like, I want to support this person, but I don't want it to be seen as like charity, or something like that. But I mean, just having his name in the liner notes like gives more oomph or whatever to this product. So I feel like if it had been on the cover of the album, like that would have given kind of the big Peter Buck stamp to kind of the whole thing. And maybe, I'm sure it was all with the best intentions, that he was kind of like, no, I want the spotlight to be on you, and to
Yeah.
Mark Eitzel. And so, I'm sure it was well intentioned, but I think that I would put this on the list of like, things that happened along the way, of
Yeah.
Eitzel's career
Yeah.
that kind of like, it's like, in retrospect, maybe should have done it like that. And then it would have,
Yeah.
sold X number more out. I feel like that would have helped here, but
Yeah.
it is what it
Well,
is.
it is what it is. Why don't we get into the production, the arrangements, the overall vibe? So both Eitzel and Buck are credited as producers here. And I've got to say, just a very overall impression that I have of the sound of this album, the tone of this album, the recording of this album. I love it. I love the tone. I love the warmth of what they capture in the studio. I do like in certain places the looseness. It definitely feels like a very lightly rehearsed album, right? It does not feel as though these songs are overworked, certainly. But I really like, I guess for me, I like the warmth. It isn't completely disconnected from the jazzy, smoky, loungy 60 Watt Silver Lining. There are definitely moments in this album where you get a bit of that, but it's also different. It takes it in a slightly different direction, more rock direction, but it is still pretty kind of warm and smooth, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of clean, natural sounds, and I think the thing that separates it from 60 Watt is the immediately recognizable Peter Buck guitar playing here and there. But, there's a couple songs on this album that they get really into these kind of jazz freak out sort of like passages, and that, I mean, it does touch upon like the jazziness of 60 Watt, and even, the AMC San Francisco album had a couple of moments or whatever. But yeah, I mean, this is a, it continues the trajectory of a more like clean, easy, like, I don't want to say easy listening, because like, certainly those jazz freak out moments are not, I wouldn't categorize those as easy listening, but
so I would actually, so I'm going to follow up on that. I would categorize this as even more of an adult contemporary feel than 60 Watt. 60 Watt certainly has this, more adult alternative vibe, I think, due to its jazziness, but there's something about the kind of acousticness or rawness of 60 Watt that I think puts it in a slightly different category. This feels more rounded out to me somehow in a way that feels more kind of adult contemporary. It also just could be the chord choices of Peter Buck, right? He does not use those strange tunings, and generally speaking, I just think his songwriting is much brighter.
Yeah, for sure. A lot more major chords, a lot poppier in a more conventional pop kind of sense. And, it's like if they were writing these songs so quickly, and it's like I kind of see how, they're kind of trying to churn them out like as fast as they can. And so the easiest approach is kind of like, okay, here's the verse, and then here's the chorus, and we're going to repeat the verse, and then we're going to repeat the chorus, then we're going to have a bridge, and then we're going to, like just a more straightforward kind of construction of the songs. Versus Eitzel, like purely solo, because Eitzel's guitar playing does get into those more strange tunings and unusual fingerpicky sections and things like that. And I think by this time, Peter Buck's sort of guitar blueprint with R.E.M. was pretty established,
Yeah.
and so you definitely hear it here, and the way some of these songs, the way like the verses and choruses are constructed, they definitely sound like 90s era R.E.M.
Yeah. Yeah. I would completely agree with that. Now, one other reference, though, that I have to say I don't remember ever feeling when I first listened to this album back around the time that it came out, but it definitely was evocative to me on these re-listens, is it's all about the drummer, okay? Barrett, from Screaming Trees and Mad Season. When I started listening to this album in preparation for the episode, I was like, God, it feels very Mad Season to me. If you remember that Mad Season album.
Oh, well, I remember that you loved that Mad Season album.
I loved that Mad Season album. I thought it was terrific. It's a really interesting album because it has the edge that one might kind of expect from something where Lane Staley is singing on it from Alice in Chains. He has very kind of edgy, interesting, memorable voice, I think. But it also had this smooth, almost loungy touch. And I think it's almost entirely because of the vibraphone that the drummer plays kind of throughout that album, and he does the same thing on this album. He plays marimba and he plays vibraphone. These are not instruments that you hear very often at all.
Yeah.
But they're so immediately evocative of some thing, right? Like there's just like you hear them and you're just like your head immediately goes into this certain space.
Yeah, smoky, dreamy, more cerebral, kind of atmospheric space. Because I know Tuatara was the other, Barrett Martin was playing in that group as well. And, and as I recall, they had kind of like that jazzy, smoky atmosphere kind of thing going as well. So he is apparently the linchpin of that sound.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of what we're going to say kind of throughout the rest of the discussion on this album, I will say, listening to the vibraphone specifically, I've always personally kind of liked vibraphone.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know why. Because it doesn't get used much.
Who dislikes the vibraphone?
I think we're going to have to ask the listeners to write in and tell us, what are your opinions on vibraphone? Just share them with us. I feel like it is an instrument that probably for lots of practical reasons, not a lot of like rock bands choose to embrace because it's a fucking enormous pain in the ass to move around. Mm-hmm. If you've ever tried to move a vibraphone, it's not fun. But it's actually a really pretty instrument that I think, I kept on thinking as I was listening to this, I was like, God, there should be more vibraphone in like slowcore albums. It just is like it has this really kind of interesting atmospheric sound that I don't know. I guess I wish there were, if anybody out there is, has a favorite vibraphone band or album that they can recommend, please send it across. Because one thing I'll say for sure after listening to this album, I have an appetite for more vibraphone.
Turn up the vibraphone, man.
I know. So what about the songs, though? I am just going to throw it out there. I think that these songs, the performance, the recording of these songs is just, I love it. I think the group of musicians that were gathered to create this album are clearly all very, very talented and very tasteful. I think the recording, as I said already, I actually like the warmth, the relative warmth and of this recording. But I just feel as though the songs kind of across the board feel underbaked to me. it feels as though these are song fragments or full songs that didn't benefit from the much more maybe rigorous experimentation that AMC did. So if you think about like Restless Stranger era AMC, there are songs that pop up in there that I just kind of feel like, yeah, there's a kernel of something in this, but they didn't quite figure out how to really unlock it. And I think that's true on AMC albums through Everclear. And I think around the time of Everclear, they somehow figure out as a band how to really take Eitzel's approach to songwriting and then craft these things, shape them into really special songs. I feel like this album lacks that again. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And, I think it's all down to how quickly the album was written and recorded, like they kind of, I'm sure Peter Buck didn't have a year, to develop this material, so, I think they were just kind of like first idea, best idea, boom, 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 boom. Here we go, and those musicians were, good enough and they already had some chemistry amongst themselves that they could just be like, oh, how's it? Okay, that goes like this and blah, blah, blah. And they just kind of laid it down. But like as opposed to, AMC, where a lot of their material was developed collaboratively with everybody there, or, everyone at least was writing their parts and they were rehearsing and then maybe road testing, songs.
Yeah.
And so the song kind of has a whole, this development process behind it by the time it gets on an album. And I'm sure they didn't do everything like that. There were probably things that they played the first and only time in the studio, but yeah, I would agree that this one feels a little like they kind of got like, 80 to 90% of the song kind of banged out quick, but they didn't really have the time to like hone in on that last 10%. And, so I think that a lot of, but there are, great, wonderful ideas here and moments that are really lovely and lyrics that are really interesting. But it doesn't feel like as grand a statement, on the whole as some of the earlier, more, monumental Eitzel related albums.
Yeah, it's really, I think that there's this interesting kind of conundrum for the listener, for the record label, and probably for Eitzel as well, which is, okay, you've done your first solo album. It wasn't a big commercial hit, but it was, in and of itself, I think a really successful album creatively. At this point in his career, this is backstory from the Sean Body thing, there is discussion. He is kind of simultaneously working on the songs for Caught in a Trap and I Can't Back Out as this is all happening, right? So these two things are kind of tracking more or less in parallel. He had gotten permission from Warner Brothers to do basically a lo-fi indie release on Matador. And it was unclear whether this album was going to be that Matador release or whether it was going to be his next Warner Brothers release.
Okay.
And then when it turned into a Peter Buck album, it just kind of turned into the Warner Brothers release, I think for lots of really logical reasons for the record label and probably for Eitzel. And Caught in a Trap ends up being the Matador album, right?
Okay.
But I do wonder, because the musicians on this are so good, the recording is so good, I would argue, and because Peter Buck's name is kind of so big, it kind of naturally became the next album. And when you first listen to it, you're like, yeah, this sounds like the next big album. This doesn't sound like a lo-fi indie EP, right? But I think the songs, like, don't actually stand up to all of that. Like, they kind of are this, in a very rare thing for Eitzel's career, I think the songs don't carry the weight of all of that other stuff in on this one, I guess. And so I kind of like in some ways wish this were like even less well produced and put out on Matador. You know what I mean? It was like, I feel like it was probably a pretty highly pressurized release for them with a lot of expectations.
Yeah.
And I think they just didn't quite give the songs what they should have in order to really live up to those expectations. I understand maybe why they did it. It probably was a really fun process, but I think just in retrospect, commercially, it doesn't really fit anywhere well.
Well, and I would think that, the process of writing these songs was very different, right? Because
Yeah.
they started with Peter Buck playing guitar. They did not start with Mark Eitzel playing guitar. And so this is the only album in his entire discography where he did not, the germ of the song, musically did not come from him. And I'm sure the process of writing a song where you've written the music and the lyrics is different than if somebody else is like, here's some chords. Can you sing something over this? That's a different thing, And so I would say, he's probably slightly out of his comfort zone here because he's not in control as much of the music. He's purely just singing over this music. But I think there are probably a few moments on this album where it feels like there's a mismatch, like something doesn't jibe between the music and the lyrics, like tone wise, that, can only really happen if Eitzel's kind of doing both, like simultaneously, So, I mean, as it turns out, this is sort of like, this album is almost like a different beast than any of his other solo albums.
It almost feels like the way that I think it probably isn't thought of this way within the catalog generally, but it almost feels to me more like a Toiling Midgets album than an Eitzel or AMC album. Does that make sense in that way where he really is coming in and singing and, and
that's a good call. I forgot about Toiling Midgets. So he had kind of done this before where he came in and it's like, your job is just to sing and write lyrics, and we'll do the music. So he had done this before. And I'm sure there were some AMC songs that started with like, I don't know, Voodoo or something. And, but there's still
especially early in the career.
There's something about this that doesn't feel like a full-fledged Mark Eitzel solo experience.
I feel like it almost feels, I mean, maybe this is totally crazy to say, but it almost feels to me like I would have a very different feeling about the album if it was a Peter Buck album that Mark Eitzel was on. Or if they just came up with a band name that was like the, Toiling Skinnies or something,
Right.
That, I don't know. I wouldn't come to it with the same, I think, set of expectations around the song. Well, anyway. Enough about that. We're going to dig in. We are going to dig in deep. We're going to go track by track. So let's just think about this as we go on our journey, Jay William. Okay?
Yes. It's in the back
and
of
let
my
it
head.
Okay, we're going to let that inform our thoughts, see how that stands up to the rigor of what we're about to do. So, side A. I've broken it up. There is no vinyl. So again, I actually looked at a very rare cassette tape that has side A's and side B's on it. So I'm still going to talk about it in side A, side B. We're going to try and get this episode done in a single episode. That's what we tried to do with 60 Watt, but we failed. We're going to try it again here. So let's get into it. If you have to ask, 4 minutes and 21 seconds, album opener, let's go.
There's no way in. The street is all blocked off. Police lights spin. Sirens and certain pain.
All right, J. William Hall. There we are. If you have to ask, tell me, what do you think?
This, similar to some AMC albums, like this is sort of the like slow, moody, atmospheric opener. The key
Yes.
difference between this one and some of the earlier ones is that this doesn't not really feel like dark. Like it's
Yeah.
got the prominent marimba kind of setting the mood, and it just has this very nice, languid kind of atmosphere, but it doesn't feel like there's an edge or a hint of like danger or darkness here. And
Yeah.
that's immediately different, than virtually
Yeah.
any of the last, handful of albums. They would have a slow, kind of moody opener, but it would be like dark or sad or something negative in there, and this one just feels real smooth and mellow.
Yeah, it's funny. I was reading the lyrics to this one, and generally, I have some. I struggled with the lyrics on this album overall. But one thing that I will say about this one, it definitely paints this very kind of cold weather picture. Very imagistic, but it's a cold weather lyric. But the music is hot weather music to me. I mean, this is a very strange thing to say, but it feels kind of like languid and syrupy and warm and relaxed and like good. It feels like it has this really kind of cool, humid vibe to it that I really liked, but it was kind of dissonant with the lyrics, which I didn't dislike at all. I actually thought that was kind of interesting. But as an album tone opener, it definitely sets this, for me, kind of syrupy, smooth, sultry.
Yeah. I'm thinking,
you know what I
like,
mean? Kind of like
New Orleans, hot summer night, at a mellow place, not a hot jazz place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
At night, I think Eitzel's voice here, he's got the breathy, sort of more crooner, kind of thing, which seems like early in his solo career that, things were coalescing around that as sort of like his image or whatever, as a musical artist. And so, this feels appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah. I also say that, like, as in terms of number, I think number one, that the vibraphone in here is so evocative. It sets such a strong tone for what to expect from the music on the rest of the album. But I also, this is minor, but there's this whistling bit at the end of the song that I also think works equally well in setting the tone for the album. It kind of is telling the listener, hey, listen, this is going to be loose. It's going to be smooth. It's not overproduced. Like, I'm going to do some, you know what I mean? It just kind of feels like it feels jammy in a way that I like, generally speaking. I'm not a big, like, jam it out live in the studio kind of a guy all the time, but I don't know. I do like that vibe, and I like how that's set up at the beginning of the album here.
I noticed that in the credits, Bruce Caffin is credited with string arrangement.
Yeah. So there you go.
So that's a little bit of a tie from 60 Watt.
It is. It is. Yeah, I mean, I really, I have to say a lot of like, I do have I miss the members of AMC as I listen to this album, generally speaking, with the exception of the drummers. I think I would prefer Barrett Martin on drums. Although, I gave Tim Mooney a lot of shit for miscellaneous percussion. Barrett Martin is, he's got a whole garage full of shit that he plays.
It's true.
So
leaning heavily on the vibes.
Yeah. Well, anything else we want to say about If You Have to Ask?
I wanted to note one lyric that I thought was really cool is the one that we sort of referenced in the intro. My voice gonna sneak like smoke through a crack in your window pane. Gonna
Yeah.
curl up your stair and light a fire in your brain. Like, I just thought, and that's the thing with this album is I also found the lyrics kind of challenging in terms of like, what is this? I don't know what this is about exactly, but there are still like really great Eitzellerian couplets.
Yeah, there are moments in here that are really great. I love that lyric, and he definitely, even in, I feel like mostly these songs feel pretty thrown off, but even in these things, there are just these little nuggets that you're like, you can kind of imagine 15 years earlier, Voodie and those guys like hearing that one line and being like, oh man, that's the gold that we need to figure out how to kind of mine around, right?
Yeah.
And they totally still exist in here. Yeah, good stuff. I like this one. This is one of my faves on the album. Actually, I love that it's the opener. I think it's great kind of great opener. But there is no. This is going to come up probably lots of times. But just the chord choices in the songwriting, it is so much brighter than AMC. It is just like so much more optimistic than American Music Club. Take all of the lyrics, all the singing, every bit of instrumentation out of it. Just these chord choices. It's just like this is a different vibe.
For sure.
All right, so let's move on to Free From Harm, track 2, 3 minutes and 21 seconds. Let's go.
The laws of purgatory. Hold your train off the track. Spooky music playing. Laws you can't take back.
There it is, J. William Hall, Free From Harm. Is this song, are these lyrics Mark Eitzel writing to Mark Eitzel?
That's a good question because I couldn't tell you. I had a hard time like interpreting exactly what this was about. I again, there are individual lines and images in it that I think are really cool, but on the whole, it maybe a bit underwritten, or maybe this was, you know what I mean? Like it felt like it could have been tightened maybe a little bit. Having said that, this might be the catchiest chorus that he's ever written, I think, up to this point.
Well, it feels to me. All right, so there's two things I want to throw out there for you. This song feels to me so much like an R.E.M. song. When I listen to this and I just kind of like try to ignore his vocals, I'm just like, wow, this is an R.E.M. song from. I'm not an expert on the R.E.M. eras, but it feels like, God, I can remember this kind of R.E.M. song.
This is early 90s R.E.M.
Yeah. So you definitely got that as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I have it in my notes and everything.
And so like I while I was listening to this album, this is a little bit of a long walk, but I listened to this album a few times, right? And I got this feeling that reminded me, do you remember in probably 2002, I'm going to say, 2002, more or less, that era, Will Oldham put out an album called Bonnie Prince Billy Plays Palace Music.
Yes, I remember that album.
Or plays the... Yeah, and he like basically went out and hired a bunch of like Nashville killer legendary studio musicians and covers all the early kind of Palace hits. Do you remember? I mean, what are your thoughts on that album?
Well, I don't own the album. I remember kind of hearing bits and pieces, so I can't judge it. But in concept, I thought it was kind of cool, I have to say, because especially because like. That early Palace stuff was so lo-fi and kind of like shambly, and so just the concept of like hiring these crack Nashville studio aces to just come in and do pro ass versions of these songs. I thought it was kind of cool,
I totally agree. I thought it was such an interesting idea. And I think there are some places on that album where you're just like, oh, this is awesome. Like it in some ways makes you appreciate the pure genius of his songwriting without letting the performance and his early lo-fi stuff get in the way of that. In a weird way. You know what I mean? It's contradictory. You almost think like, oh, if it's just a guy and a guitar in a bedroom, the songwriting is really the only thing that you get to see. But in a way, that's not true, right? Like you kind of... The oddness of his performances and the lo-fi-ness of it forces you to listen to the music in a different way. Whereas when you see it or hear it presented like classic Nashville stuff, you're like, oh fuck, I get it, right? But it doesn't always work that way. You know, and some of the songs it just feels a little uncomfortable. And I felt this way about this song. I was just like, it's almost like these people are all coming in, like this is a group of Nashville studio musicians coming in to try and make sense of Mark Eitzel songs. And it doesn't quite like fit on this one. That was how I felt.
That is interesting. 'Cause, I mean, my take wasn't really like that. And maybe it's because I am more familiar with R.E.M. And so to me, this didn't even sound like Mark Eitzel's song. It sounded like Peter Buck had a leftover R.E.M. idea and Eitzel was like, okay, I can come up with something over that. And I think they came up with a killer chorus. I think it's so catchy.
Yeah.
And, just the way the harmony on it and stuff is really great. Yeah. But it also, otherwise it sounds kind of like second-rate R.E.M., but they did do one, they do the Phil Spector Ronettes Be My Baby intro. So boom, 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 pow, boom,
I know.
Boom, boom, pow, which is
totally.
This iconic, way to start the song. I think it's like they were kind of having fun and, throwing this together quick. And I think it turned out probably better than it should have, in my opinion. But that's interesting, your perspective about the cognitive dissonance going on,
Yeah, I don't know why that popped up into my head, because it's not an album. That Bonnie Prince Billy album is not an album that like I listen to much. When I go back and listen to a Will Oldham, there's so many Will Oldham albums at this point, right? Like, that is never the album that I listen to, but I do, or I did back when I had CDs. I had that album, and I listened to it a decent amount. Back then. Anyway, I'm
gonna go find that album now because I remembered that I was intrigued and I never really gave it a shot.
Well, one of the things for me, I'm sure that you remember when you got really into Will Oldham. I heard it for a second and I was just like, this is fucking ridiculous. I did not get it at all. I was just like, because you were also into a lot of stuff that, frankly, listen, very good friend. I love your musical influence that you've had on me. But there were some things that you listened to, like Home, that I was just like, this is just this. He doesn't really like this. He likes the idea of this more than he. I'm sure that that's not true, because you're not the kind of person to do that kind of thing.
No, but
that was the way I felt. I was like, nobody could really like the story is great, but like it's weird. This is not good.
I was drawn.
That was kind of how I felt.
I was drawn to those more like amateurish. DIY, type of artists, because that's what I've been doing since I was a teenager, and so it's always interesting to hear what, other people are doing, especially if it's just this kind of like home recorded, like unvarnished thing, I mean, I was heavily into that back in the 90s. I think
See,
I think I've
it's
kind
like
of phased out a
Jandek,
bit.
right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, Jandek. Love
It's like-
love the concept.
I know. I am completely obsessed with the idea of Jandek,
Yeah.
but like I will never listen to I don't like listen to the
Yeah, they're
music
hard
and think
listen.
like,
It's
oh,
a
this
hard
is-
listen.
I want to listen to this. Like,
Yeah.
no, I don't like it. Like, but I love him as an idea. I just don't like
Yeah.
the actual music.
Well,
And
I mean, so much music is packaged as like it's not just the music; it's also the story of the artist.
yeah, no, for sure. For sure.
and the story of
Yeah.
their struggle or whatever it is. And
Daniel Johnston, great.
Yeah.
But Daniel Johnston, it's like there would be glimpses of really amazing songs in some of those things. Or it's like when we were kids, remember Wesley Willis in Chicago
Yeah.
was like the big thing.
yeah, like self-releasing, homemade cassettes. We had a guy.
Yeah.
We had a guy in my hometown. Hey, it's Jeff. And he was just this dude that did all this weird home music on his Casio and sang and danced. They had this open mic nights up at he put out his own cassettes, and me and my friends were like, oh, this shit's awesome. Like, so,
Yeah.
it's a vibe. It's a wavelength. I don't know.
But to go back to Will Oldham, I like you got really into this years before I did.
Yeah.
I just didn't appreciate it. I just didn't get it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And you and some of our other friends really liked it, and
Oh,
I just
it
never
took
put
other
in the-
friends to convince you to try it. It wasn't
No,
good enough that I liked it. You needed others.
No. There were no other. That wasn't it. But eventually, I don't know when this happened, but it was quite a bit after college. I kind of like went back and started to get it a little more. But that Bonnie Prince Billy Plays Palace album, I will say, I listened to. And it served for me as like an interesting greatest hits of the Palace years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was almost like a roadmap for me to go back to his early albums and rediscover them, because like I got him in because I think the first Will Oldham album that I really like, I liked it and I just genuinely liked the whole thing was I See a Darkness.
Yeah, that's considered.
Is that the name of that album?
Yeah, that's probably considered his like opus.
Yeah, amazing album, right? But I think that came out either right before or right after the album that I'm talking about. And so somehow or another, that album kind of led me to the Bonnie Prince Plays Palace album, which then led me back into the old stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, but that's kind of my very long-winded way of saying, like, I have that album. I know the album pretty well, and for some reason, I was just getting that vibe as I was listening to this album a little bit. But Free From Harm was kind of the first song where I really felt that way.
I hear you.
But I also will say, I mean, I know Mr. Eitzel. I have no idea whether you're out there listening. I don't know. I just don't know. But if you are, I know that some of your friends are. I know that for a fact. Consider a Bonnie Prince Plays Palace type recording of your songs where like you go out and find like we've been talking about like all these current Nashville singer-songwriters. Go like put together a band in Nashville, do some duets with some of these people now, and basically do your own greatest hits, but do it like that. I think it would be amazing. That is $1 million idea. I just gave it to you for $0.
Yeah, because it costs $0 to go hire all the best,
That's right.
session
That's
men
right.
in Nashville. Yeah, but.
Hey, listen, Eitzel, if you want to do that, I will chip in for the musicians. I will co-produce.
Holy moly.
I mean, yeah,
All
I'm
right.
saying it right
it's
now.
out there. It's in the airwaves. But, he didn't exactly do this, but there is that one Eitzel album coming up later where he has the Greek orchestra, like, and they do.
Oh, I have no idea about this.
We'll
one.
get there. We'll
All
get
right,
there.
well, all right, we'll get there. All right. Well, listen, we've spent a lot of time on Free From. Anything else to say about Free From Harm? We had a lot of side tracking, bad tracking.
We did.
here.
I like it. I think that they opened the album with kind of a, good 1-2 punch.
You like?
I do.
You like the sequence?
I think
you like the kind of lower key opener, and then the pop song, Smack Sean.
Yeah,
on
I mean,
track
this
two.
is
Yeah,
that's a classic setup. That's I'm trying to think if R.E.M.
It is a
used
classic
that.
setup.
Not really, but still, I think it's catchy, and I don't know what it means, but
yeah.
All
right. Well, let's move on to track 3, Helium. 5 minutes and 23 seconds. Why don't we just listen right now?
Is your silence? Is your silence? Is your silence? Breathing helium.
Okay, Jay William. That "is your silence" line is very evocative or semi-evocative, but I think it is like one of those little gold nuggets in these compositions that I'd like to see mined out a little bit more.
Yeah, I would agree. I think these lyrics, again, it does feel like 80% or 90% of the way there, but I can't interpret. Like, I'm not sure what they mean,
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of the songs that I feel like feels like it really should have been given the benefit of a little bit more woodshedding. I like the vibe of this. I like the sparseness of this recording. But I just somehow or another felt like the vocal lines, the actual melody was not super memorable. And it just feels to me at a gut level like there is something in here, but it just needs more teasing out.
The overall vibe and sound reminds me very much of an R.E.M. song, Drive, which was the opening song on Automatic for the People. It has that kind of like, it's like this very somber kind of dirge.
Huh. Really?
Yeah. I mean, the melody's different and stuff, but just the vibe is sort of similar. It is, again, sort of like adult slowcore in a way, like, it real slow tempo, dark atmosphere, but recorded in such a way that it doesn't feel like edgy or overly gritty. It's like clean, but it's not a more memorable song for me on the album.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that this is one of the ones where I really feel like, gosh, I wish they would have dug into this one a little bit more.
It's a pretty abrupt,
but again,
Eitzel's famous for his abrupt tonal shifts on albums. So you come off of, Free of Harm, which is like one of the peppiest, most upbeat things. And then it's like this one, it's kind of an abrupt shift.
Yeah, it is an abrupt shift, but we're going to go into another abrupt shift, Jay William, on the next song, Stunned and Frozen.
Yes.
It is 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Why don't we just give it a listen? All right, Jay William. I think that that the rain has passed over section of this, kind of going into the chorus more or less, I guess, is really, I think, the closest thing that this album offers to one of those classically haunting, sing-alongable Eitzel chorus lines. That is my assertion.
Yeah, I mean, this has got some short story sort of vibes to it. The trapeze artist falls. He wanders around near a river. He eventually dives into the river. There's some details that I'm not sure how they fit into this short story.
Yeah.
So again, it feels like, another iteration may have tightened it somewhat. But the story, while it reads very kind of tragic and sad, again, like the music has got the strummy R.E.M. more upbeat, positive vibes kind of feel to it. And so, and not to say that can't work. I mean, there's lots of bands and artists that, put dark lyrics on top of lighter sounding music and it creates something, interesting. But this one also sounds very reminiscent of a specific R.E.M. song.
Which R.E.M. song? Because I don't know anything about R.E.M. song, but I wrote an R.E.M. song here that it reminded me of.
The one I'm thinking of is this could be the saddest. Half a World Away.
Okay.
Which is, I think, is
oh yeah, I know that song.
Yeah.
See, I put night swimming.
Oh, okay.
But
Same
I think
album.
It's probably
and
same album.
Yeah. And this is the era of R.E.M. that I feel like the music on this West album reminds me of.
Yeah, it is that jangly guitar plus the accordion.
Yeah.
It just really is very, evocative of it. Nice. I think very nice.
Yeah.
But it does, I mean, listen, I think this is a song that I think is good. It could have been great if they really beat it up a little bit. I think the piano is doing too much work on this recording. It's kind of carrying the...
Yeah, it's like
it's one of the more memorable parts of the music.
It's the main riff.
And I don't know. I'm not loving it. I think it's one of the stronger vocal lines on the album, actually. But it's just so R.E.M. I also think this song is too long. I think there's like one too many verses in here or something. But this song is pretty static in terms of how the music builds or doesn't build. And I don't know. I just feel like it's a little bit too long for me. But I like this song. I think this is one of the examples where like there's a clear Mark Eitzel in here and there's a clear R.E.M. in here. And it's one of the areas where you're like, oh, I can imagine these being chocolate and peanut butter. Like, you know what I mean? I can see those two combining. There's a hint of it happening here. They don't quite nail it in the way that I'd like. This is a song that makes me feel like one of the things that I kind of like take away from this album overall, which is I want to hear the second album that he does with Peter Buck. You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
that's the big unanswered question is, coming out of this album, like, why was this a one-off? Was it just like serendipity at that moment? They both could do it and they did it and that was that, I could have been into this developing further, like what would a second set of songs, be like? But
yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's remarkable about this album, and I would pick this song as one of the examples. Like, it is clear from the book, everything that I've read. This was done exceptionally quickly. The songs were written exceptionally quickly. They demoed them exceptionally quickly, and they recorded pretty quickly and pretty easily. I would like to hear one where it didn't go that quickly and it didn't go that, where they spent 3 or 4 months on the album, just to see what would have came out of it. I think if this song is any indication, it could have been really special.
There are a number of little subtle touches that I assume Peter Buck adds because it's like guitar feedback that on almost every song on this album, there's like a little hint of that somewhere where he just does it real subtly, like as a coda or and I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
I'm noticing.
It's like a hint of voodoo. There's like a very small hint of voodoo in different spots, right?
Yeah, probably so. Cause sometimes voodoo was in that kind of role, just sort of providing, guitar feedback, atmospheric kind of things. But yeah, voodoo was much wilder, or he went further afield, I think, than, and by this time, Peter Buck's Field, we all knew what that consisted of, and it feels safe, I guess. Sometimes like some of the stuff feels safe.
I'm not a guitarist really, and I am not an R.E.M aficionado, but I have heard over years of reading books and whatever, that he's not thought of as like a real great guitarist. Is that?
I mean,
or am I totally getting that wrong?
I don't think he's considered like Eddie Van Halen, like technical, like fast shredding, but I mean, you can't say that he's not a great guitarist. Like, I mean, he has written like so many iconic, he is a great guitarist, but his style is much more, I don't know, probably considered technically more easy, strumming and chords and, but he does a finger picking kind of thing. And yes, he's a great guitarist, but, but his style is not, flashy, showy, like here comes my solo, like he doesn't do a lot of that, So
yeah, it's usually the best guitarists always do before their solo. They say, "Here comes their solo."
They announce it.
Yeah. Instead of people like, "Here it comes, ladies and gentlemen." All right, so why don't we move on?
Yeah.
Should we move on to Then It Really Happens?
Yes, please.
4 minutes and 27 seconds. Let's get it on.
All I know is I can't stay at home. I stay out all night, at least till closing time.
Okay, Helium Hall, I cannot make anything out of these lyrics. I've tried, and I cannot make a thing about it. I will say the line, all I really know is I can't stay at home. I stay out all night, at least till closing time, is a memorable repeated line in it that I think works pretty well. But outside of that, man, I had a tough time kind of working my way through these.
Yeah, I mean, the very title of the song, it begs the question, then what really happens? We never get resolution. I can't tell you what is happening. Like, what happened? Something bad, that made him go to the bar, I guess.
What's interesting is I've noticed lyrically on this album, the song titles are pretty much all taken directly from the lyrics, which is definitely something that Eitzel kind of doesn't always do, or kind of diverged from pretty regularly. But these song titles are all pretty, I would say generally speaking, they're taken from like the chorus lyric, which is a very kind of standard way of doing things. I don't know, somewhat interesting.
Yeah, I agree, because he had in recent albums he'd had at least one song that had what Godzilla said to God in the like big long titles. And there's nothing of that on this album. This is all like straightforward. And so I guess the track listing, maybe they read a little more something. None of them jump out as like a unusual song title,
Yeah, agreed. So what about this music? This one for me really has a feel of being improvised in the studio. I didn't feel like the band was like super tight in here.
It felt to me that they had kind of like the basic chords
Yeah.
for a song, and then it was a little bit like, let's just kind of see what happens, and it just kind of maintains the whole way through. There's not a lot of dynamics, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it now I will say it has, I think, the first like bridge on the album that really is like a bridge. But I don't know, overall I felt like this song, for me, this one is one of the weaker ones on the album. It just doesn't quite, again, it's one of the ones that I really feel like suffers from not enough baking.
One thing that I wondered too, and I think that this is probably a product of its era. We talked about how as the music industry shifted to CDs, albums grew in length because now they could put out a 79-minute album if they wanted to on a single thing. And this one, 12 tracks. I think a couple of them are in the 5+ minute. All in all, it's a long album, and they probably could have lost a track or two, and it might have actually helped in a way. I would rank this down, near the bottom. Will it be my least favorite track of the album? We'll find out.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see. All right. So with that, why don't we move on to In Your Life? 4 minutes and 3 seconds. This is the last track on side A, by the way. The real question is, are we gonna be able to get through this in a single episode? I think we may be able to, but let's get into it and get after it. All right. In Your Life.
And you're forced to listen. You're forced to listen. That you have nothing left in your life. You had it in your life.
Okay, so the lyrics, it just seems to me like one of the things about these lyrics that I like here is the turnabout, the twist of the knife in the last stanza. So really the way that I read these lyrics was, this is kind of like sympathy from the narrator about the subject's shitty life, shitty things that have happened to them in their life. Everything's horrible. It's just a parade of horribles, right? But you get to that final stanza, and the narrator basically says, but I'm in your life, and having you in my life is like the only thing that makes it worth living, basically. Which I think it's a subtle kind of turn of the knife. It's a subtle like twist of this story, but I like the twist of the story. You know what I'm saying? It's like this expression of almost a level of, let me take a step back. I think at some point of these lyrics on this album, because I think they're not quite worked over as well as I'd like for them to be, there are moments when I'm like, God, this is almost self-parody. This is Eitzel like falling into all of the reviewers who say that he's just too depressed and these songs are oppressively depressing and blah, blah, blah. Like, usually I think that that's wrong because there's complexity. There's usually like some turnabout in it or whatever.
Yeah, humor.
There's just more richness in it. Yeah, humor, whatever it is. It's more melancholic than depressing, strictly speaking. But I think at certain points in this album, you don't get any of that. You don't get any of that richness. It's just the kind of base level Eitzel. And this is one of the examples of the lyrics on this album where I think it has that second level to this, right? And I really, that's I think my favorite thing about this song.
So for me to try to summarize your interpretation, it's that he's talking about somebody saying that they're like complaining about their life and they've had things happen and they're so down. But he's saying, if you're down, like, I actually live through you. So that is like even harder for me.
No, it's basically like, all right, so I'm just going to pick out a few, I'm going to pick out a few sections and just read them. Really, this whole thing is like, he is talking to someone. Okay, here's a stanza. Now you can't do the dog paddle, and it's humiliating, guessing games and calling names, undermined by love and life. It's just one thing after another is like, he is talking to this you, and he's talking about how, like, all the bad things that are happening in their life. Life is difficult for this person. But then the last stanza of the song, in your life, I live in your life, and that's all that saves me. Which I think is actually in this, like, within the world of Eitzel, within the kind of world that he creates in his lyrics, that's quite a romantic sentiment. Right? In a world where everyone is a loser and everything is terrible and, you know, everything is kind of falling apart and life is just, you know, oppressive for this group of people this group of characters that tends to kind of populate his songs. What he frequently expresses is like, within a world that's terrible and all of these terrible things that are happening, we at least have each other. Right? That's a very Eitzlerian thing. And I think that's what comes in this last stanza. And I think it's the only place in this song where that pops up. And I like that turnabout. Does that make sense?
Yes. I will. There are 4 words that indicate to me that they thought that this song had potential to be like a hit single.
Okay.
The 4 words are mixed by Bob Clearmountain.
Oh, I did not. Okay, that's really interesting. I did not catch that.
Yeah, because he was like, you know, A-lister, you know, producer, mixer, whatever of that era anyway, maybe still. And so the music, this is another one where I feel like there's a mismatch between the lyrics, the tone of the lyrics when you read them versus the music, which sounds like, I have written in my notes, shiny, happy Eitzel is what it sounds like.
That's exactly what I...
You know, because it is,
I wrote,
it's the more like upbeat, strummy R.E.M. of the early 90s. Yep. And then Eitzel singing sort of this sing-along chorus over top of it.
Yeah.
But the lyrics are, you know, as you said, like they're kind of darker and, you know, they're still, I don't know how anyone would listen to this and understand at all, like what he's singing about, but it's, you know, it's sort of catchy and I don't know. It's a strange choice for the end of side 1, I think, but.
Well, I mean, given what you've said about the Bob Clearmountain mix, it does seem as though there was some notion that maybe this could be a single. I understand that if you just listen to the lyrics, right? It definitely has that. It's very poppy. But I wrote, it's funny that you wrote Shiny Happy Eitzel because I wrote, has there ever been a more upbeat chord progression on an Eitzel song, Shiny Happy People? It really is evocative of that. And it does feel quite strange, I think, within the context of what, through the majority of the song, are very kind of dark lyrics, but I do think there's that twist of the knife or that turnabout at the end that lightens it up a bit. But in any case, it is an interesting song. It's an interesting song on this album.
Yes, it is. An interesting choice for side 1, or the end of side 1.
It is an interesting end of side 1. I would agree that if they did think this is single potential, you put this right in the number 2 spot on side 1, right? Where Free From Harm shows up.
Either that, well, I like where Free From Harm is, but I would put this as the first track on side 2.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right.
It's not my decision.
All right. So speaking of side 2, J. William Hall, I am making a game time decision. We are not going to complete this in a single episode. We're going to break this up into 2 episodes. So real quick, I'm going to go through all of the things that our many fans need to do while they're out there thinking about vibraphone and what it can do for them. they're going to go. They're going to write a review. 5-star only. And if it's less than 5-star, you better write some fucking comments in there. Or else how are we going to get better?
Don't be a
Throw us
coward.
3-star review. That's right. Come on. I know that people, it's probably one of you millennials or younger. You're afraid of conflict. You're very passive aggressive. But I mean, you want to tell me something? I'll smack you right in the face. I will smack you right in your goddamn mouth. You better just say it. You better just say what you think. Mean what you say and say what you mean. Right?
I would never physically assault one of our listeners.
Oh, no.
Even if
I
they
will
gave us a
smack
1-star review, I would never physically touch them. That's illegal.
I will jumble your chiclets. You come up to me, I will fucking knock those teeth right out of your goddamn mouth. All right, so go do a review, 5-star only. Hit like, hit subscribe, share, do all the things. Do all of the things, but the most important thing for you to do, just tune in next week because we're going to cover side B of the Eitzel Buck Opus West. So tune in then. Jay William, thank you as always.
No, thank you.
It was a journey that we took together.
Yes.
Side A. We're going to take a similar journey on side B.
Ooh, I can't wait.
I know, I can't wait either. Why don't we just get some sleep, get our veggies in, do some calisthenics, and then we'll be ready for it.
Good idea.
Okay?
Those are healthy things. Let's do it.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.